In 2004, the attack came from a different direction, in an attempt to use constitutional instruments put in place by Chavez, which allowed mass referenda to be called to remove from their post any public official who wasn't doing their job. There was an attempt by the right again to mobilize on a mass scale signatures for a referendum to bring Chavez down. Once again, Chavez emerged from that with a bigger majority still, something like 60% of those who voted. In 2007, when you talk to people around the place, clearly there is a conviction that there's a new assault on the way. I mean, the newspapers and Chavez himself talks a great deal about what he calls the soft coup. And that's a phrase which is very reminiscent of and echoes with references to Chile. Because in Chile in 1972-3, as the right wing and the bourgeoisie began to mobilize their forces to bring down Salvador Allende, the discussion on the right, among the right-wing parties, was a discussion about whether to use the soft coup method, that is, to use economic instruments, propaganda and so on, to as it were, besiege the government, or whether to move directly towards a military coup, or what was called the hard coup. Now, the discussion was then, I'm not suggesting, although I don't think anybody here is suggesting any kind of immediate military coup, largely, of course, because, as people keep saying, with a confidence that I think is probably exaggerated, as people keep saying, the armed forces are part of the process here. This, of course, is true. But on the other hand, when the coup happened in 2002, the army divided its generally felt into sort of three distinct sectors. One that supported Chavez, one that supported the right, and another sector which vacillated to wait and see what happened. And unfortunately, those vacillators, the people in the middle, still remain the majority, all right, but nevertheless, at the moment anyway, the army is behind Chavez, who is himself, of course, a military man. And we'll see. But anyway, the soft coup, as they call it, really in this case is about propaganda. It's about the use of the mass media to mount a kind of continuous assault, a continuous, if you like, a sort of intellectual sabotage, creating a sense of fear, creating a sense of instability, leveling accusations day in and day out against Chavez and the movement from below, using hundreds of spurious examples from all over the country about how menacing and threatening to the state of public order the popular organizations are. That's really what's meant, and it's been crystallized in these last few weeks by a student movement, which is, although all appearances to the contrary notwithstanding, is in fact a right-wing movement led by students from both the public and the private universities, but largely middle-class students whose slogans are really not about student issues, at least not in the beginning, but who came out and began to demonstrate in the street against the closure of one of a whole number of right-wing television stations, in this case Radio Caracas, an organization actually originally founded by a group of American investors as Caracas Broadcasting some 50 years ago. But Radio Caracas was absolutely ferociously right-wing and ferociously anti-Chavista. So it's very odd to see a student movement emerging into the streets and chanting RCTV, Radio Caracas Television, as if that was some fundamental issue about the future of democracy in this country. Anything but, I would have thought. In any case, but they did take to the streets. They were very well organized, highly organized, and demonstrated, and very much with an eye to the foreign television stations and foreign news media. There's one very famous photograph of a group of students kneeling with their hands in the air in front of a group of police. Now, this is completely constructed. It isn't at all what it seems to be. It was a demonstration in which, on instruction from the mayor of Caracas, as it happened, they all fell down on their knees, put their hands in the air, and were then photographed for the world's media. They weren't actually being attacked at all. But it was a very clever piece of propaganda when you think what student demonstrations confronting police usually means for people watching it from anywhere else outside Venezuela. What was interesting, though, is that in the last week or two there was a call for a debate, and there was a public debate in the National Assembly, in the Parliament, between 5 students from the right and 5 students who supported the government. But in fact, after the first right-wing student spoke, the other 4 walked out. It was a staged walkout. And what it told you was that, in fact, there were no specific demands, really. The other demand that's been raised is for university autonomy against external intervention. And again, that's a very emotive issue in Latin America, the defense of the right of students to organize, where students have always been in the past, where universities have been enclaves of the left. But this is Venezuela, where the public universities have gradually, over the last 15 or 20 years, and obviously the private universities have become enclaves instead for a new kind of technocracy, a new meritocracy, students who are with high levels of academic achievement with plenty of money behind them. Now, Chavez has come in and moved towards creating a series of new universities, what are called experimental universities, which are really intended to provide the opportunities for working class students, which had largely disappeared over the previous 10 years or so. And these, of course, are the universities that throw their weight behind Chavez, as opposed to the others which throw their weight behind the right. So it seems as though there are extremely few demands when it comes right down to it. Instead, a much more general demand of simply raising the temperature in the society of raising anti-Chavez feeling wherever they could. The student movement is largely abated now, but it went on for about 4 or 5 weeks, and I imagine it will re-emerge in some other form, as the bourgeoisie is not going to let up in its campaign against the Chavez government.